The wind clawed down from the mountains like a living thing, driving snow sideways across the valley. It was the kind of storm that stripped sound from the world and left even wolves hiding in their dens. The Halter Ranch sat alone at the edge of the pines, its fences lost under drifts, its roof crusted with ice. Inside, the single lantern in the window glowed against the dark, a small defiance in the heart of the wilderness. Gabe Halter sat by the hearth, whittling wood with a blade worn thin as a whisper, listening to the storm's roar as though it were an old enemy he'd come to tolerate. He was a giant of a man, not by vanity but by nature, broad-shouldered, slow-moving, and quiet as the trees that ringed his land. Years of work had shaped his hands into something rough and purposeful, and years of silence had done the same to his soul. Folks down in town said he preferred the company of the wind. Some said he'd once been a soldier, others said he'd killed a man and come here to bury the memory. Gabe never corrected them. Truth was heavier than rumor, and he had no need to lift it. He had just set the kettle near the fire when the dogs outside started barking, sharp, frantic bursts that cut through the storm's moan. Gabe rose, grabbed his lantern, and stepped out into the snow. The cold bit hard, fierce enough to freeze breath in midair. His boots sank deep as he crossed the yard toward the barn. Through the swirling white he saw movement, a dark figure stumbling near the corral. At first, he thought it a lost traveler, maybe a ranch hand from the neighboring valley. But as he drew closer, the lantern light revealed a woman, barefoot, half-frozen, her hands bloodied and her shawl shredded by brambles. She tried to speak, but her voice broke against the wind. Then she fell forward into his arms. "Easy now," Gabe murmured, lifting her as if she weighed no more than a sack of grain. Her head lolled against his shoulder. Her hair was tangled with snow and pine needles, her lips blue, her eyes glassy with exhaustion. Without another word, he carried her inside. The cabin's warmth hit her like sunlight after years of night. Gabe laid her near the fire, wrapped her in a buffalo hide, and poured hot water into a tin cup. For a while, she didn't move, only trembled like a creature too used to fear. When she finally spoke, it was a whisper, cracked and wary. "My name's Ruth," she said, voice thin as smoke. "Ruth what?" Gabe asked gently. "Avery." He nodded, studying her face, dirt-streaked, pale, but proud in a way that didn't fit weakness. She had the look of the mountain folk who lived beyond the timberline, lean, tough, shaped by hard winters and harder men. "Where you coming from, Miss Avery?" Her eyes flicked toward the window, where the wind battered the glass. "Nowhere I aimed to go back to." There was something final in the way she said it, and Gabe didn't press. He fetched a pot of stew from the hearth and ladled it into a bowl. When she tried to take it, her hand shook too hard, so he steadied the spoon for her. She ate slow, the way a starving person learns to trust food again. After a while, color crept back into her cheeks. She glanced around the room, the shelves stacked with tools, the leather tack hanging by the door, the great rifle mounted above the mantel. Its metal gleamed even in the dim firelight, and the engraving on the barrel caught her eye, a worn emblem of the U.S. Cavalry. Her gaze lingered on it, but Gabe didn't explain. "You live out here alone?" she asked quietly. "Been that way a long while," he said. "Don't mind it much." She pulled the hide tighter around her shoulders. "You ever get lonely?" He thought about that. The fire cracked softly between them. Not the kind that hurts. Outside, the storm deepened. Snow thudded against the windows, and somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote wailed. Ruth shivered. Gabe rose and added more wood to the fire, then set about mending her torn shawl with thick thread. She watched him in silence, her eyes flicking between his hands and his face. "You didn't ask who I'm running from," she said finally. "Didn't reckon it was my business," Gabe replied. "But I'm guessing whoever it is, you ain't ready to see him again." Her lips trembled. "They'll come. They always do." Gabe's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Then let him come. Ain't much out here worth talking but cattle and silence, and both fight back if you push hard enough." That drew the faintest ghost of a smile from her. It faded as quick as it came, replaced by a faraway look, the kind of stare born from memory. She leaned against the chair's arm, eyelids heavy. "You shouldn't have helped me," she murmured. "It'll bring trouble." He looked at her for a long moment, then at the snow raging outside. Trouble don't need an invite in these parts. It finds its own way. When she finally drifted into sleep, Gabe draped another blanket over her and sat back down, eyes fixed on the fire. For a time, The only sound was the wind pressing against the cabin walls and the low hum of burning pine. He could hear the faint rhythm of her breathing, uneven but alive. It reminded him of the days after the war, when he'd tended wounded men in makeshift shelters, praying each sunrise wouldn't be their last. The rifle above the hearth glinted again in the light, a relic of another life, the one he'd sworn to bury when he came to these mountains. His hand rose halfway, as if to touch it, then dropped. That part of him was gone, or so he wanted to believe. Near midnight, the dogs barked again, short and restless. Gabe stepped to the window. The storm had eased, though snow still fell thick over the yard. The moon tried to push through clouds, faint and cold. For a long minute, he saw nothing. Then, in the far edge of the pasture, movement, a dark shape slipping between the trees. Could have been a deer. Could have been worse. He stayed there, watching, until the shape vanished into the pines. Then he bolted the door, checked his rifle, and sat back down beside the fire. Ruth stirred in her sleep, murmuring something he couldn't make out. He didn't wake her. By dawn, the storm was gone. The valley lay buried under white silence, every fence post capped in snow, every track erased. But as Gabe stepped outside, lantern in hand, he noticed something under the fresh powder, half-covered impressions that led from the far ridge straight toward his barn. Hoofprints. He crouched, brushing the snow aside with a gloved hand. More than one horse. Heavy, deliberate. The kind left by men who didn't wander by chance. The dogs whined low behind him. Gabe straightened, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved now, just a quiet breath of morning, the kind that comes before things break loose. He turned back toward the cabin, smoke curling from its chimney, and saw Ruth standing at the window, watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. He gave her a small nod, pretending calm. She didn't smile. Something in her gaze told him she already knew. He shut the door behind him, set the lantern down, and poured himself coffee he no longer tasted. The hoofprints outside were already vanishing under drifting snow, but he knew what that meant. Tracks can hide. Men can wait. Trouble never loses the trail. And somewhere beyond the frozen timber, whoever she'd been running from was still riding, following a trail that ended at his door. Morning came gray and still, the kind of cold that bites before the sun finds its carriage. Steam rose from the horses in the corral as Gabe saddled one, his breath mixing with theirs in the frost. Ruth stood in the doorway of the cabin, wrapped in his old coat, watching him in silence. The storm had passed, but a strange quiet lingered, a quiet that didn't belong to peace. "Fence lines down by the creek," he said, adjusting the cinch strap. "Won't take me long." She nodded, her face pale against the fur collar. "I'll keep the fire." "Good." He rode out slow, boots brushing snow-dusted sage, the rhythm of the horse steady beneath him. The valley lay open before him, a white sheet marked only by the black line of pine and the silver thread of the frozen creek. He liked mornings like this, the kind where work and silence met and a man could forget the years behind him. But that feeling didn't last. As he neared the fence, he saw something far off, a thin column of smoke twisting into the pale sky from the lower valley. It wasn't a ranch fire. Too dark, too small, too out of place. He stared at it a while, frowning, before turning his horse back. By the time he reached the cabin again, Ruth was outside, barefoot in the snow, her hands shaking. The fear on her face struck him before her words did. "Riders," she whispered. "Up in the hills. I saw them. 2, maybe 3, watching." Gabe dismounted, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. Nothing moved now, just the hush of melting snow dripping from the eaves. Still, he trusted her fear. The kind she carried wasn't the sort that guessed. It remembered. "You sure?" he asked. Her voice trembled. "I know the way they ride. The way they stop and wait." He led her back inside, set his rifle near the door. The room felt smaller suddenly, the shadows thicker. She sat at the table, staring into her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost ashamed. "They're called the Bannon Gang. Used to be soldiers once, Confederate boys who never stopped fighting even after the war ended. They turned to robbing convoys, killing miners, burning out settlers. Clay Bannon, he leads them." Gabe leaned against the wall, saying nothing, his eyes fixed on the fire. The name meant little to him, but the tone in her voice said enough. "I was with them," she said after a long silence. "Not by choice. They took me when they raided the Avery homestead up north. My brother tried to fight. He didn't make it. I I did what I had to stay alive. Her shoulders shook, but no tears came. Gabe's voice, when it broke the quiet, was softer than she expected. You ran. She nodded. They found gold, a cache from a stolen payroll wagon. They buried it somewhere in the high passes. I saw the map once. They think I remember it. That's why they're coming. Gabe stared into the flames, jaw tight. And you do. Her eyes flicked up to meet his. I remember enough to hang every one of them. He said nothing for a long time. The crackle of the fire filled the space between them. Outside, a crow cawed once and was gone. You can still leave, she said finally. If they find me here, they'll burn this place to the ground. They'll kill you for taking me in. Gabe's gaze lifted slowly, steady and unreadable. If trouble's comin', best it finds me standin'. The words landed heavy in the room. Ruth turned her face away, not trusting herself to speak. Gabe poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one in front of her. She took it with both hands, sipping slowly, though the warmth did little to chase the chill from her bones. They spent the day in uneasy quiet. Gabe went about his chores, feeding the horses, checking the barn doors, stacking firewood. Every so often, he'd glance toward the ridge. Nothing. Yet the stillness felt wrong, too careful, too watched. Ruth stayed inside, mending torn seams, her thoughts circling the same dread she'd carried for miles. By mid-afternoon, gray clouds had begun to move again from the west. A brittle wind slid through the valley, stirring the drifts into ghosts. Gabe stood near the barn, hammer in hand, when he caught sight of fresh hoof prints near the creek, deep ones, half covered by wind-blown snow. He knelt, brushing the powder aside. The pattern was clear, 4 riders, at least, and heavy. They'd passed in the night. He looked toward the mountains, where the sky darkened like bruised steel. Something inside him, long quiet, began to stir. The part that used to listen for danger in every breath of wind, every creak of saddle leather. The soldier in him, the one he thought he'd buried, was waking. When he returned to the cabin, Ruth was sitting near the window, staring into the gathering dusk. He told her what he'd seen. She didn't speak, just gripped the windowsill until her knuckles whitened. They'll come tonight, she said. Then we'll be ready. I don't want you hurt on my account. He shook his head. I've seen worse men than them. They bleed the same. She studied him for a moment. You talk like someone who's fought before. He didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the rifle above the hearth, the old cavalry mark faintly catching the firelight. Used to, he said quietly. As evening fell, he worked in silence, checking his rifle, counting cartridges, filling the lanterns. Ruth helped without being asked. The cabin's air grew tense, filled with the scent of oil, pine smoke, and the faint iron tang of gunmetal. Every sound, the pop of firewood, the wind shifting through the eaves, felt louder than it should. The first sign came with the dusk. A faint whistle, far off in the canyon. It wasn't bird nor wind. Gabe froze, listening. Then came another, softer, answering from the opposite ridge. Ruth's face drained of color. That's them. He motioned for silence, crossed to the door, and looked out. The last light of day had gone, leaving only a dim silver glow over the snow. The land stretched empty, quiet, deceptive. Minutes crawled by. Then came the faint creak of leather. A distant snort. Somewhere down the slope, a horse stamped the ground. Gabe could see nothing, but his gut told him what his eyes couldn't. They were close, and they were waiting for dark. He closed the door, drew the bolt. Get some rest while you can, he said. She shook her head. I won't sleep. Didn't think you would. He poured a small measure of whiskey into 2 cups. They drank without a word. The fire burned low, shadows stretching long across the floorboards. In that silence, Ruth spoke, her voice barely above the whisper of the flames. When they took me, Clay Bannon said I'd never outrun him. Said the mountains belonged to him now, that no one could hide from his dogs. He likes to mark his prey before he kills it. She touched the scar just below her collarbone, where the fabric gaped slightly. He carved a letter there. His. Gabe looked at her, his face unreadable, but his eyes burned with something deep. Not pity, not anger exactly, but a quiet, cold fury. He won't touch you again. Outside, the wind turned, carrying with it faint sounds, the rattle of a loose stirrup, the soft murmur of voices trying not to be heard. The horses in the corral grew restless, stamping and snorting. Ruth rose slowly, peering through the small window. At first, she saw nothing but snow. Then, far off along the ridge, a flicker, a single light swaying in the dark. A torch. Then another. And another. Her breath caught. Gabe. He was already standing, rifle in hand. Across the ridge, the line of torches grew, a dozen points of fire moving like ghosts through the pines, their glow rising and falling with each step of the riders who carried them. Gabe exhaled, slow and steady, eyes narrowing. "Well," he murmured, "looks like your friends finally found the trail." The last of the light died as the outlaws fanned out along the high ground, their fire-lit silhouettes crawling against the night sky. The ranch below sat quiet, its windows dark, its defenders waiting, two souls bound by chance, fear, and something stronger neither of them dared to name. The night came alive with laughter that didn't belong to men who feared death. It slithered down from the ridges, carried by the cold wind, rough and cruel. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world painted in white and silver, quiet as bone. From the shadowed slopes above the Halter Ranch, Clay Bannon's gang spread like wolves circling a wounded elk. Lanterns flickered, guns glinted, and horses stamped restlessly, their breath fogging the air. Inside the cabin, Gabe moved through the dark with calm precision. He doused the lamps, letting only the fire's faint glow guide him. The room smelled of oil, pine smoke, and fear, but his hands were steady. He checked his Winchester, loading each cartridge with the slow patience of a man who'd done it too many times before. Across from him, Ruth's fingers trembled as she pressed shells into a revolver cylinder. Outside, a voice broke through the stillness, deep and mocking. "Evening, Halter. We come for what's ours, the woman and the gold she ran off with. You hand her over, maybe we leave your fine little cabin standing." No answer came. The fire hissed softly. Gabe stood beside the window, watching faint shapes move beyond the trees. He could see torches now, weaving through the dark like hunting lights. Bannon's voice came again, louder. "I know you're in there, Halter. You always had a taste for lost causes. Don't make this your last one." Gabe lifted his rifle, sighted the torch nearest the corral, and squeezed the trigger. The crack split the silence like lightning. The torch fell, and with it, a man's body hit the snow with a thud. For a long heartbeat, there was nothing but wind. Then came the roar, shouts, curses, horses screaming as the gang scattered for cover. Ruth flinched at the gunfire, but Gabe didn't move. "That's your answer," he muttered. The siege began. Bullets tore into the walls, splintering wood, breaking glass. Gabe moved from window to window, firing with cold precision. Each shot found its mark or drove the attackers back into shadow. Ruth reloaded for him, her hand steadier with each shell. Smoke from the gunpowder mingled with the scent of burning pine, thick and heavy. The outlaws tried to rush the barn first, thinking to drive the horses out and set the place alight. But Gabe had seen that coming. He'd rigged the doors with a loosened beam and a hidden rope. When two men yanked them open, the timber dropped like a guillotine, crushing one instantly and pinning the other's leg. His scream tore through the night until a single shot ended it. "You planned for this," Ruth whispered, watching him move with that unnerving calm. "I planned for everything," he said. "Out here, a man learns or dies." A shadow moved near the corral, another outlaw creeping low. Gabe gestured for Ruth to take the lantern and step to the back door. "Get to the horses. Dry 'em into the gulch if you can. We don't let them get trapped." Her eyes widened. "You'll be alone." "I've been alone most my life. Go." She hesitated only a second before slipping out into the snow, her breath catching in the cold. The night swallowed her fast. Gabe turned back toward the window. A figure darted between the trees. He fired. Another silhouette fell. But for every man he dropped, two more seemed to take their place. The gang was tightening its noose, closing from three sides. From outside came a low whistle, then the sound of hooves pounding away. For a moment, panic rippled through the gang's ranks. Ruth had driven the horses free, scattering them into the canyon. Their leader cursed, shouting orders. Gabe took the chance to slip from the front window to the side door, rifle ready. The snow crunched softly beneath his boots as he moved around the cabin's edge, flanking a pair of men crouched behind the woodpile. They never saw him coming. 2 shots, and they fell without a word. He returned to the cabin, blood spattering the snow behind him. Inside, the fire burned low, casting restless shadows along the walls. The quiet that followed was worse than the noise. It meant they were thinking, planning. When Ruth returned, her cheeks were raw from cold, her hair streaked with frost. "They're regrouping," she said, breathless. "I heard one say Bannon wants you alive." "Then he's fool enough to try," Gabe said, reloading. But as the silence stretched, she reached for his arm. "Gabe, there's something I didn't tell you." He turned toward her. Her eyes were full of something dark. Shame, fear, truth clawing to get free. "When I was with them," she began, "it wasn't just hiding and running. I helped. I loaded their wagons, tended their wounded. The night they robbed that mining convoy, I was there." Her voice cracked. "They took a child. I tried to stop them. Bannon hit me, said I'd bought my life with my silence. I ran that night, but the child, he didn't make it." Gabe's jaw tightened. He looked away, out the window where torches flickered through the trees. "You tried," he said softly. "That's more than most." Her eyes shone with tears she refused to shed. "I thought I could forget, but every time I close my eyes, I see him. That's why I ran. Not for gold. Not for revenge. Just to stop seeing." Before Gabe could answer, another bullet shattered the window beside her. She ducked instinctively, glass slicing her arm. He grabbed her, pulling her behind the table as another volley hit the walls. Then came the sound of boots pounding through snow. They were charging again. He moved to the door, fired twice, and fell back as bullets ripped through the planks. One grazed his shoulder, spinning him against the wall. Blood soaked through his sleeve. Ruth screamed his name, catching him before he dropped. "I'm fine," he grunted, pressing a hand to the wound. "Keep loading." She hesitated, trembling, then snatched the rifle from his grip and rose to the window. Her first shot went wide, but the second cracked true. Amun cried out and fell. The third she fired without thinking, dropping another. Gabe watched her, half in pain, half in awe. She reloaded with fierce, steady hands. Her fear burned away by something harder, the will to live. "You've done this before," he said. Her eyes flicked toward him, defiant. "Once or twice." The attack faltered. The gang pulled back into the trees, leaving the dead scattered across the snow. The night fell silent again, broken only by the hiss of wind and the groan of the barn timbers. Then came the voice. Deep, slow, deliberate, carrying through the stillness like judgment itself. Gabe hauled her. Ruth froze. Gabe's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "I know that name," Bannon called out, laughter in his tone. "The Butcher of Red Rock. Thought you could hide up here playing rancher? I still remember the stories. Cavalry tracker, ghost in the hills, the man who brought death to his own kind. Guess I found your grave before they did." Ruth turned to him, stunned. "Is it true?" Gabe's voice was low, distant. "I did what I was ordered to. War don't make heroes. It just leaves survivors." Outside, Bannon laughed again. "You killed for the government. Now you'll die for a thief. Seems fitting." Gabe leaned against the wall, his breath slow, eyes on the dark. "He's not wrong," he said softly. "But some things are worth the price." Smoke began to seep through the cracks in the walls. Ruth coughed, eyes widening. The barn, they'd set it on fire. Through the window, she saw the flames already licking at the roof beams, sparks rising into the night. "They're burning us out," she gasped. Gabe forced himself to his feet, limping to the door. "Let him. Smoke cuts both ways." The fire's glow bled through the windows, turning the snow outside orange and gold. The air thickened, heavy with the stench of pitch and ash. Bannon's men began to move again, closing in behind the blaze. Ruth helped Gabe sit near the table, his face pale beneath the soot. He gripped her hand, his voice barely a whisper. "When they come through that door, you aim straight." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her jaw set firm. "I will." The fire had eaten through half the barn by dawn, turning beams into falling comets of flame. The sky above the valley was painted in bruised colors, gold bleeding into ash, the air thick with smoke and gunpowder. Snow melted into black mud, steaming around the cabin's foundations. Inside, Gabe Halter reloaded his Winchester one last time, his breath ragged but steady. Ruth knelt beside him, her face streaked with soot and tears she hadn't noticed. "They'll come when the smoke hides them," Gabe said, his voice rough as gravel. "We end it now." Ruth nodded. Her hand shook only once before going still. She checked the revolver, spun the chamber, and slipped extra rounds into her pocket. Outside, faint shapes moved through the haze, men calling to one another, the sound carried by the morning wind. The barn groaned, then collapsed in on itself with a thunderous roar. Sparks scattered across the yard like swarming fireflies. For a moment, even the outlaw stopped, watching the blaze consume what little was left of the ranch's heart. Then Clay Bannon's voice rose above the crackle. "Come on, boys. The butcher's bled enough. Let's finish it." Ruth's eyes met Gabe's. "How many?" "More than enough," he said, forcing himself upright. "But fewer than before." They stepped outside together, swallowed by smoke and sunlight. The cold bitted their faces, but the heat of the burning barn drove back the frost. Bannon's men emerged from the haze, shadows armed with rifles and greed. Gabe took position beside the well, using its stone lip for cover. Ruth crouched near the corral gate, eyes sharp, every movement measured. The first shots rang out, echoing through the valley. Bullets struck the ground around them, spraying mud and snow. Gabe answered with 2 clean shots, dropping the nearest riders before they could reload. Ruth fired from the side, her aim low and deliberate, catching one man through the knee and another in the shoulder. The battle turned to chaos. Smoke blinded friend and foe alike. Horses screamed, rearing against their reins. Gabe moved with the grace of memory, firing, reloading, ducking behind the well as bullets chipped stone from the rim. Ruth darted between cover points, her braid whipping behind her like a banner. She didn't notice when one bullet grazed her arm. She only kept fighting. The gang tried to flank them through the corral, thinking to come from behind. But Gabe had set the last of his traps there, ropes rigged to the old beams, pulleys weighted with logs. As the first outlaw leapt the fence, he tripped the line. The beam swung down, snapping the fence in 2 and crushing the men beneath it. The rest hesitated, staring at the bodies steaming in the snow. Ruth used the moment to reload and shouted, "Bannon, you're running out of men." Her voice carried through the haze, and from somewhere near the ridge came a low, furious laugh. "I've always had enough." Bannon rode out of the smoke like something carved from vengeance, a tall man with a long black coat and a scar running from his jaw to his ear. His revolver gleamed silver in the morning light. He fired twice, driving Gabe to cover, then dismounted with the slow confidence of a predator that knows the end is near. "Come out, Halder," he called. "You and that whore can make it quick or make it hurt. I owe you both some pain." Gabe stepped from behind the well, rifle in hand, blood dark on his side. "You owe this valley peace," he said evenly. "That's all I came for." Bannon grinned. "You still think you're some kind of savior. You were a killer when I knew you. Nothing's changed but your excuse." Their eyes locked. For a long second, time froze. 2 men shaped by violence, standing in the ruins of everything they'd touched. Then Bannon moved. The world became noise and light. Gabe's shot tore through Bannon's coat, grazing his ribs. Bannon's bullet hit Gabe's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Ruth screamed, firing at the men trying to circle behind. One dropped, another fled, the rest hesitated, torn between loyalty and terror. Bannon advanced, gun raised, but Ruth ran toward the corral, shouting, "Over here." Her voice drew him like a lure. She vaulted the fence, ducking low as he followed. She knew every step of the ground. She'd watched Gabe set the trap hours earlier. The instant Bannon crossed the corral, Gabe pulled the rope beside the well. A beam swung from the rafters, crashing down through smoke and flame. It struck Bannon's leg, pinning him to the mud with a sickening crunch. His gun flew from his hand. He roared, clutching at his thigh. "You!" Ruth stood over him, revolver trained on his chest. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her arm trembling with exhaustion and fury. Gabe limped closer, rifle lowered but ready. "It's over, Bannon," Gabe said quietly. "You took lives for greed. I take none for glory." Bannon's face twisted with hate. "You think sparing me makes you holy? You're no better. You're just tired." Gabe's expression didn't change. "Maybe so." He turned slightly, coughing into his sleeve. "But she's better. That's reason enough." For a heartbeat, it seemed done. The smoke thinned, revealing the valley littered with fallen men, the barn's last embers dying in the dawn. Then Bannon's hand moved. His fingers closed around a small revolver strapped inside his coat. He pulled it fast, the metal flashing in the light. Ruth saw the motion before Gabe did. She didn't think, didn't breathe. She fired. The shot echoed across the valley. Bannon's body jerked once, then went still. The revolver slipped from his grip and vanished into the mud. Silence fell. The wind shifted, carrying away the smoke and the stench of fire. Ruth stood frozen, the gun still raised. Then it slipped from her hand, falling beside her boots. She dropped to her knees beside Gabe, pressing her hands to his bleeding side. "You're hit bad," she whispered. He looked down at her hands, then at the sky breaking open above them, gold light spilling through the haze. "Ain't the first time," he said faintly. "Maybe the last." "Don't say that." Her voice broke. He smiled weakly. "You got a right to stay, Ruth. This land needs someone who still believes in something. Tears streaked her soot-stained cheeks. "You're not dying here. Not after all this." He reached up, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "You listen, girl. Everyone leaves something behind. A fence line, a grave, a promise. Mine's this, that the likes of him don't win." She gripped his hand, refusing to let go. The wind sighed through the pines. Around them, the snow began to fall again, slow, gentle flakes landing on blood and ash. By the time the sun rose fully, the valley was quiet. The fire was out. The bodies were gone, buried in drifts or dragged away by the mountain wind. Only the cabin stood, scorched but still standing, its smoke rising straight into the brightening sky. Weeks later, travelers passing through the high country spoke of it in hushed voices. They told of a ranch where 12 men rode to kill, and only the snow remembered their names. They spoke of a giant rancher who fought off a gang to save a mountain woman, and how the two vanished into the peaks. Some said they died, others said they built a new home where the rivers run clear and the law is written only by God and mercy. Come spring, wildflowers grew over the charred earth where the barn once stood. The wind moved through the valley softly, as if it carried a secret it refused to tell. They say some legends are carved in stone, others in silence, but the ones born of mercy, those never fade.